Hans Ray. I'd usually say welcome to the podcast, but for the first time ever, we're actually in the guest's house, so thanks for having us. How's it going?
Good, man. Good to have you guys. We got the nice Scottish weather for you guys here this week.
I know, we've come all the way to California, and I'd go as far as say as the weather is at least as bad as it is back home, so yeah, it's been interesting. At least you're making us feel at home.
Oh, yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Yeah, we're on the beers as well. Don't often have beers on the podcast, actually. Yeah, we're here in Laguna Beach. How long have you been here for?
I lived in Laguna since the early 90s. I came to America in 87, and I lived in this very house since 93.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I've been 28 years in this house.
That's pretty mad. It's a cool spot for
couldn't
sure.
afford it nowadays.
I was going to say. So, yeah, I think one thing is probably, maybe I'm just being sort of selfish and want to hear the secrets of your success, but you must have one of, if not the longest careers in professional mountain biking. How long have you ever been professional for, and what's the secrets to the success? I might start taking notes.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, it amazes me sometimes too, because I've been saying literally since I've been 16 years old that I'm going to do this trials thing in 1 or 2 more years. And my professional career didn't even start until I was 20, almost 21, when I came first to America. And then after that, I was like, well, 1 year or so I go back and finish my university and school, and out of 1 year became 2. But always, and even now, like I'm like, well, let's see if I can do it a few more years. And I don't know, it does. I would have never dreamed in a million years that I'm still going to do this stuff professionally and get paid when I'm 50. But I think I found ways to reinvent myself or to bring value to the sponsors. And I always say you got to keep throwing wood in the fire. And there's different ways. I was one of the first guys to find ways to be sponsored without being a racer, because in the early days, if you wanted to be a pro, you had to be a racer. That was the mountain bike industry measured all by racing, even though when the boom happened and we sold millions of bikes, I remember a few times people would be like, wow, we sold millions of bikes in the last 4 years, but there's only 30,000 people racing, have a NORBA license. And people start to realize that people do other things with the bikes. And I was one of the first to kind of break off and take my trial skills. I always wanted to take him away from the competition and into like real situations. And then, first it was through the videos, and then later I took it on these adventure trips where I would go to remote and exposed places or ride trails that nobody had ridden before. And yeah, but I think next year is my 35th year as a pro, and I've been the whole time with GT. That's another.
That must definitely be a world record of some sort in mountain biking, if not cycling.
Yeah,
to be with that brand, that's unheard of, especially nowadays.
We had conversations like this, and there's not many people who had a major sponsor that long. And I know that Steve Caballero, the skateboarder, he's had Paul Peralta and Vans for, I think, at least 41 years now.
All right.
And in mountain biking, I know Tinker has a long relationship with Cannondale, which I guess just ended. I'm still like a full-on professional athlete who hassles and does, like the social media thing and filming and the events. And, I just try to find my niche, and that has changed. My position in the sport has changed over the years, but I kind of feel like I adopt new things, and the sport grows and it gives new opportunities. The latest, the e-bike, it came at the perfect time for me.
Yeah, came at the perfect time for me as well. We talked about moving to America. How old were you when you actually moved over from America, and where, just in case people have been living under a rock for the last 50 years, where were you actually born?
Well, I was born and raised in Germany, but I had a Swiss dad, so I actually ended up with a Swiss passport. I could have had probably both, but I had only one. My mom was German. But I lived there all my life, went to school there, and then I started actually university. And I had kind of retired from competitive trials. I started competitive trials when I was probably 12, and then I did that throughout my whole teenage years. And when I was 18, I was like, I never did the switch to motorcycle trials, and I figured that train has departed, and I better get now serious with life and go to school, because nobody was getting paid or professional. I mean, we made a little bit of pocket money doing trial shows here or there, like at some city festival or car dealership or whatever. And even being one of the top riders at the time, you know, you would maybe get a free bike out of the deal, you know, which in some cases you even had to return at the end of the season. But this American trials rider used to come to Europe, and because trials is a European sport, unlike mountain bike and BMX, which are classic American sports. And he was sponsored, and he wasn't even the top 30 in Europe, and he had all these glamorous BMX uniforms and like Sunny Boy from California, but he was a cool guy, Kevin Norton, and he really wanted to get trials going in the States. And he told me like once, Hans, there's a new sport in America, it's called mountain biking. And they always do trials, but you should come over and show them what real trials riding is, because he knew the real trials scene was in Europe. That's why he started competing. And he brought me over, and without him, I wouldn't be sitting here right now, obviously, but he wanted to make trials big. And so he introduced me to everybody and everything, from not only sponsors, and he wanted other bike companies to get into the sport. So he talked to GT, because he already had Haro, and before that Kuwahara. So he wanted GT or other brands to get behind it, and he would introduce me. I would get to know all these BMXers. You know, as a kid, I would look at the BMX magazines, and these pros would make like 6-figure incomes and drive Porsches, and they were teenagers, or you know, and it was incomprehensible for me coming from Europe. And I got to meet most of those guys literally in the first few weeks. As luck would have it, there would be a video shoot. I was invited where everybody was, and then like he would also introduce me to mountain biking. Until then, I never ridden a bike that was bigger than 20-inch wheels, and never done a mountain bike tour. And he introduced me to the Laguna Rats, who is one of these original old school mountain biking clubs. They almost started at the beginning of mountain biking, shortly after, but the club is still around to this day. And I mean, the club is actually in the Hall of Fame, and a lot of people consider that club the original free riders, because they would ride terrain that even the best riders at the time, like guys like John Tomac, would ride with us, and they would go like, wow, that was a new dimension of steep, you know. So anyway,
what are the bikes looking like? What are the sort of bikes are they riding? Just like
back then, it was all hardtails. It was before front suspension. There was a hardtail mountain bike with a rigid fork with cantilever brakes, so there was no disc brakes. There was no none of that carbon stuff, or there was none of that suspension. There was none of that stuff, and really small tires. Like everybody would like ride at the most 2.2, you know, or even smaller tires, and even like they would have toe straps, you know, like before there was clip pedals. I remember Shimano, actually, Shimano is not far from here, and they would bring the first SPD pedals to our club here to test them. And the first XTR, a lot of that was partly with the help of our club, or some riders of our club developed. And this sport, or the bikes, technology, the sport, everything has come a long way, and the way we ride bikes. I mean, that has also changed. I mean, before that, people would just ride any dirt road, and they couldn't imagine it could be any better, or nobody, you know. It wasn't until much later that people started building purpose-built trails, and the word flow came along, and that actually people realized that, wow, it actually can be a lot better than it is, you know. So yeah, a lot of changes.
So when you moved to America for the first time, did you have this kind of vision in your head, like, I want to make us a pro rider, or was it very much a case of, I'll just go over there for a bit and have some fun riding?
You know, I had a quite successful trials career in Europe. I was in the top 10 in Europe for like 6-7 years, and I thought, you know, a trip to America and get to see this place, you know, that would be kind of a great way to end my career. And so I didn't have that plan. I never even dreamt of it. I couldn't have dreamt it in my wildest dreams. But one thing led to another, and we got a phone call. It was in the first few weeks I was here. I hadn't even signed with GT yet, and there was a phone call from Swatch, and right here they said, we need a guy in New York City this afternoon. We did this photo shoot, and it was quite famous. It was a big ad campaign in many magazines, and they were like, we need 2 guys in New York City this afternoon. Tickets are laying at the at the airport, and we flew out there. And I hooked up with Swatch for 19 years. And at the time, they were also doing clothing. Those are Swatch pants and stuff. And Pops watches are those watches you could clip on your clothes or in your hair. I had like 30-some watches on when we started talking. And I said, hey, I could, I don't really have a clothing sponsor. If you want, I wear your clothes. And funny story, something that never happened ever since then. I said, if you pay me $500, I figured I'd pay my rent, that I would wear your clothes.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it happened to be one of the first guys to go away from the traditional BMX uniforms and actually wore like kind of a casual kind of look.
Kind of gear, isn't it?
But I asked for $500, and when the contract came, they offered me $1,000. And that never happened ever again. That somebody gave me more or double than what I asked for. But and they said, hey, we want to also do these shows with you all over America at these shopping malls. Where we do these shops in parking lots, and sometimes a lot of time, or always, we had some skateboarders along, like Rodney Mullen and Rob Roscoe, and guys like this. I would meet all these people from all these different sports, and we would do shows. And at the time, I was thinking, since I was kind of studying marketing, I asked them if I can do an intern job. If I come again or stay another year, can I do an intern job? And at the time, they said yes. It never happened because they didn't even know what an internship was, but it gave me the confidence to make, okay, if I have a Swatch internship, because that was kind of the cool company.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, Swatch paved the way for Red Bull.
Yeah.
I mean, Red Bull took everything to another level, but before there was Red Bull, it was nobody wanted to have anything to do with these action sports, and Swatch was there, and they sponsored events and athletes, and that kind of gave me the confidence. And then out of 1 year became 2, and the sport still didn't really explode and still didn't really get that big. It was not until, like I said, I came in 87, and it was about 90, 91 when the boom really started, and it got really big. So
at that time was Red Bull, that's just predates Red Bull by quite a few years.
They didn't even exist.
Yeah.
92, there was the first ever Red Bull athlete, was an Austrian, at least the first ever Red Bull cyclist was an Austrian named Gerhard Zadrobilek, and he was a cross-country racer. He had come from the road, and he was sponsored by Red Bull, and he had Red Bull either a little patch on here or I think on his helmet. And I remember at the time our team was just about to do a deal with Coca-Cola to be co-sponsored, and he asked, can I keep that on? And my team manager told the Coke guys, hey, this guy has this little Austrian company on his shirt. Can you have mind if he keeps it on? Yeah, we don't care about them. So little did they know that they would make...
That wouldn't fly these days, that's for sure.
Yeah, so that was way before, like I said, Swatch would sponsor, even they would sponsor trials competitions as early as, I want to say, 83 or 84 in Germany. Swatch was a sponsor already of trials competitions back.
That's insane, isn't it?
Then they did skateboard stuff, and they did a lot with freestyle skiing and acrobatic skiing guys, and a lot of these things. And yeah, the Red Bull came way later. I think one of their big breakthroughs was maybe, and I might be wrong, but the Air and Style they did in Austria, the big snowboard contest they always did. That was like one of their early bigger competitions, I think.
So at that point where you're on the New York taxi in the Swatch gear, what are you on a GT at that point? Or are you on just?
I was still on a Monty.
Oh, really?
That's a Monty with like stickers over it, but I haven't had. I was just like literally the next week or so. I got a GT deal, and then they built me a bike. Gary Turner himself, and that at the same time they started their mountain biking program. They had mountain bikes in '85, but some BMX guy designed them and they weren't good, and then they didn't have mountain bikes. And then they hired this guy who was a specialist for mountain bikes, and he kind of came up with the triple triangle design, and he brought in, and with that they started Team GT, which myself and Rishi Grewal, who was a cross-country racer, we were the first permanent members on the team, and it was really cool times. I mean, it's sometimes you look back at the stuff you experienced and saw, and there's literally the president of GT, the kind of one of the owners, the guy who really built the company was a super visionary guy. Unfortunately, he died way too early. He died in 96, so 10 years after I met him, he died that changed a lot with GT, but he made GT the number one company, and he had such a vision, and he was a really cool guy. And I think if he would be still around, our whole sport and industry would be different. He was that powerful, and he wasn't even the G and the T in the GT. That was Gary Turner, his partner, but he was more like the guy welding and taking care of the bikes, and Richard was the businessman. And what I was going to say is, there's a book being written. It's 25th anniversary to his death.
I see.
And next year is the 50th anniversary of GT, and the book will be released, his story. And I got to read a draft, and it gave me goosebumps. There was many cool stuff in there. And there was even stuff in there that I didn't know. But it will be a really good read. And if you want to read a success story in the bike industry, that's something. And their roots go way back in BMX and all that. I mean, they were some of the guys who helped make BMX big and all that. And
it's always interesting that there's like quite often the sort of faces of the sport, whether it's like the brands and stuff, and it's quite often these like sort of unknown people that are behind the scenes that are actually like the least big part of it. They don't necessarily get the praise for certain things. Yeah,
it's always like this. And that's kind of how things are, or it gets forgotten quickly. People sometimes don't honor or remember the history. Things get, but that's just, life is so fast, especially in the era we live. It's like, it doesn't take much for people don't know anything about the beginning or how long the sport's been around. But
when you're like, say, riding for Swatch and signing for GT, are you still kind of thinking this is going to be a short-term thing and I'll go back to my studies at some point in the next year or two?
Yeah, I still think that today, even though I don't think I'm going to go back to my studies because I made the best marketing school in real life.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from watching other people and myself. But it was, I mentioned to you earlier, I was thinking about coming back. There was a lot of pressure because I was the pioneer situation was also was not just doing the crazy stuff on the bike, but nobody had ever had a career, it would last for 2 years. And back then you had to have an apprenticeship or learn a job or go to the university. And there was pressure from parents and from people. And they were like, oh, what is he going to do in a couple of years? Then he has no education and he's going to work at the gas station or what? And, there was these kind of pressures, and there was pressures of, I don't know, my parents had faith in me, but it wasn't like from the beginning that there was big money or so, like I would I could pay my rent and I could save a little money, and then it would add up. But it was one point I almost became an inline skater because there was always all of a sudden opportunities, and I almost threw it all away until the GT boss I mentioned earlier, Richard, he had this idea of doing a video. And until then, there was none of these bike videos out, nothing. Yeah. There was no internet even. And we did one of the trials videos outside of a competition setting where I ride on crazy stuff, in urban and technical trails and with loud music and stupid one-liners, and people dug it and they ate it up, and I had the stage for myself. There was nobody else doing that stuff, or very few people, and that helped me really. I think it was the single biggest milestone in my career was that. That's funny you say about inline, because I guess at that time was it literally did it just go kind of stratospheric for a few years, and then obviously we now know it didn't last? Yeah, it came out there in the early 90s. It literally started in the house I lived in, my flatmates and stuff. And we had a mini ramp, and the whole scene, the first ever magazine, started in my house. And then later, when the sport kind of took off and I kind of stuck with my biking roots, but I still lived in the house, and I would later it became part of the X Games like 5 years later. Yeah. And all of these stars from then were pretty big names, because on the X Games was on TV, they would crash on our sofa and stuff, and these guys would be up all night like turning tables and making the magazine, and the inline skaters tried too much to be like skateboarders, and the skateboarders didn't like that, and that's why they kind of then gave them a bad rep by calling them names. And I think they tried too hard to be like skateboarders, and that didn't fly. But there was also a time when skateboarders hated BMXers, and now they go really well hand in hand. Yeah, but it's funny that it's just like different enough, isn't it? Yeah, similar enough to be like related to each other, but
different enough not to be a threat or like trying to step on toes, wasn't it? It's funny that. One thing you said when we were here before, years ago, did you not end up competing in the X Games at some point on Trials bike?
Yeah, right here.
Silver medal.
X Games. It was called Extreme Games the first year, and then they changed it to. Is
that before ESPN owned it, or is that
no?
Was it always been ESPN?
Yeah, that was the first one, and that was another big milestone for me because at the time ESPN started those X Games. Skateboarding, BMX, they were really hurting those sports. Yeah. The magazine, the riders had not much income. It was tough, and mountain biking was booming, and mountain biking was the most advanced and professional sport of all of them. And so at the first X Games, they had skateboarding, they had BMX, they had inline, they had rock climbing, they had bungee jumping, they had, and in mountain biking they had a slalom, a giant slalom, and a trials. And they for the TV format they couldn't do a whole downhill or cross country; it would be too long. And the problem was our federation was very demanding because we had our own sponsors, every team that would conflict with the ESPN sponsors, and we had to have this and that, and our federation, which was a big mistake, they insisted that the mountain biking should always be in the mountains, but the X Games would be in LA.
The streets, yeah.
And then we would be 2.5 hours away in some mountain resort competing with no spectators and not really being part of the whole thing. But the cool thing about those first X Games were they picked in every sport a guy, like they picked Tony Hawk in the skateboarding, they picked Matt Hoffman for BMX, and they picked me as the trials guy. And leading up to the X Games, they showed a lot of footage on TV and they explained the sports and they tried to create names that people are familiar with, and so they're familiar with the rules. And we did a lot of PR. And the cool thing was that very year there was a strike for Major League Hockey and baseball. And ESPN did not know what to put on TV. So they would run my videos like sometimes 4 times a day, like on ESPN, and I would get, and then they did all these special segments, and we got a lot of exposure there leading up to the X Games and then through the first X Games. But then our federation was so difficult and it didn't last that long for mountain biking. And eventually the mountain bikers were all like, we need the mountains. So ESPN was like, well, then we'll put you in the Winter X Games, which was coming a couple years later. They started that. But mountain biking really didn't fit in there either, even though we could do a proper downhill or something, but it was not the same. And so that didn't last. And that's kind of how they blew our chance to be part of all that.
When did the whole filming thing kind of come about? Like the actual going out and making like a proper VHS and making a 45-minute piece.
Those are my first 2 VHS tapes, and Hans No Way Ray was the first one, and I think we released it in 92, maybe, until then. I did some filming stuff, usually more like for a TV special or so, or for... sometimes they would film us at the competitions. Like ESPN would sometimes cover the competitions back in the 80s already.
Oh, really?
When there was a Norba Mountain Bike World Championship in Mammoth. Yeah. And they would come with the helmet cameras.
The big giant ones.
The battery, the whole recorder was in your backpack, 30-pound backpack with the recorder and the batteries. And sometimes the guy would even carry the cable behind you to the section and film you. I mean, that was like... now we have these GoPros and these phones can do better films than the best cameras back then could. But in 93, the endless summer of mountain biking is a movie called Tread. And Tread was the first kind of mountain bike film filmed with 16 mil. Yeah. And it had a big I don't want to say theater release, but we had live screenings in every town across the country, really? And it was a cool thing. And the cool thing was, since it was one of the first, all the bike companies sponsored it. So everybody had a bit of invested into the thing. So everybody was kind of promoting it. It wasn't just like one bike brand and then the other ones didn't want to have anything to do with it. Yeah. And then there would be a segment and everybody was in it, from who was the who of mountain biking. And they would really show these different segments of the sport and really interestingly filmed, but also... And then like Craig Herbold and myself, we were kind of the Beavis and Butthead who would guide throughout the show. And we had this car that we drive through the desert. And it is definitely a cult film that inspired a lot of people to ride and start biking. And And that was like way before the free ride thing even started, and way before the DVD boom, got kicked off. That was like a few years later.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about having multiple brands in a project, which you would occasionally see these days, maybe a couple of bike brands getting behind maybe a bigger release, but it's a shame that such a thing could happen again, where like you try and promote the sport, which would then sell more bikes rather than having to everyone do their own thing. But
those things are easier to pull off in the early days of a sport or a movement or a trend, and at those days sponsoring a film was something new and different too. People weren't used to sponsor a film, so they would usually spend their money on a racing team or event sponsoring or a trade show. That was and magazine ads. Those were the three or four ways that the marketing budgets would be spent. So then when all of a sudden movie segments came to, and then later, a few years later, when the whole free ride thing became something, then all of a sudden these team managers, well, now we need money for these guys who ride down cliffs. And not only were they not really understanding that culture, they didn't want to give money away from their racing budgets. And it was like, it wasn't kind of easy. And then later, the sport diversified, then you have video segments, and then you have to all of a sudden not only sponsor a free rider, but then also a dirt jumper or people would do trial shows a bit. That was quite popular with shops. Shops would book
a trial rider to do a trials show at the front.
At shops or at or BMX teams too. The BMX teams always would go on summer tour, and they pack a van full and go to a different bike shop every day and set up, and that's the only way kids could ever see a guy live.
Yeah.
There was no internet, and if they're lucky, they saw something on TV, or there was a couple movies that had a little BMX in, like the movie Rad. I just watched it last week because there was 35-year anniversary. It was a famous BMX movie.
Yeah.
But those kind of films inspired generations of people.
So when it comes to those two videos that we're looking up on the wall there, how did that all come about? Was that something that GT got behind?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier that the owner of GT one day said, Hans, it's so difficult to explain to people what you can do on a bike. Why don't we do one of those videos? And I think at the time there have been already a couple skate videos and maybe BMX videos out. And he wanted to do one with me, a trials video. We went out and filmed it here locally, a lot in Laguna. A lot on some of the same trails I still ride today. We already ridden those trails, and they were a hit. Those things, people wore them out. They would literally, if people tell you they watched them 100 times, they mean it. It's not like a way of just saying that they watched it a lot. They would watch it in slow motion. They would have to rewind in slow motion and see, how does he get the back wheel up?
Yeah.
I remember the first time in one of those videos, I remember hopping up sideways onto even a bench, like half the size of this table. And people go like, they played that backwards, like they couldn't imagine I go up it, they thought I just hopped down it, and there was a lot of that. And then that led to do another and another, but that was really, and these things would go around. I remember one year the distributor from GT from Argentina came to me and said, you're really famous in Argentina. I said, why? We sold 10,000 of your videos down there. I said, really? Wow, I didn't get any royalties from Argentina. They just copied that themselves. But we the videos were like, initially it was a marketing tool for GT, and I didn't expect to make money really. I did actually make royalties, and it was quite nice. But it was a really good tool to sell a lifestyle and an image, because mountain biking was a little bit hurting on the lifestyle. It was all about stopwatches and training and racing. And this was a bit more like, let your hair down, have fun. It was always about fun, and also it opened the door to a new audience of mountain bikers who didn't want to race against the clock, And
were they just getting distributed through bike shops then?
Yeah, GT would distribute them, but they would actually, they sold a lot, and I have no idea. And I that's one of the nice things about the social media now. I get all these comments from people telling me their stories of how it influenced literally their life people always talk about now, you're an influencer, and some of the stories I get to read makes me kind of proud, because you hear like these stories of how people really changed their life and how they then became a bike rider. And then the next thing is they bought their first GT. And since then they bought 8 GTs. And then they opened up even a bike shop. And then eventually they got to sell GTs in their bike shop. And it was like complete, like stuff like, or just like, it was just nice to hear these people who got hooked on the sport and because of these things, and they still at it. And at the time, I sometimes didn't quite realize, I think, how many bikes I sold for GT. I was just having fun being out there doing my thing and didn't really have much expectations. But that's what made these early days so special for everybody. People always talk about the golden days. And I think the main reason we call it that is because nobody had expectations, and we were just like, stuff would happen all the time, and it was really fun and good, but it was also new and fresh, and people weren't like getting greedy or weird, or it was like,
just take it as it comes.
Yeah,
it's interesting you say that, because I definitely feel with the younger kids today, because now that path of being a professional rider has already been forged by people like yourselves and then other riders that have followed as well. They can now see it, and then combine that with social media. You just have this combination of which ends up showing this lifestyle to kids, which is great. It's something to aspire to, but then sometimes I just feel they maybe get a little bit ahead of themselves. And it's interesting to hear what you say. You came across to America and like you didn't plan to be a pro. It just happened. But you have all these young kids that are getting into riding, and they're like, I'm sure you get it on social media. How do I get sponsored? How do I do that? And it's kind of frustrating to see when you just want to tell them to just ride their bikes, and if it'll happen, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, and that's easier said than done. And then sometimes it's pressure on parents, or just like, but the bottom line is you do have to have fun, because it's all based on passion. And if that passion isn't there, then you're never going to be the real deal for any sponsor, because you don't have that. You need to bring that across, but you also need to have dedication, and you need to have creativity, and there's different ways to become a sponsored rider, or and everybody can find their own little niche within this. I mean, the sport is now so big, there's a lot of opportunities that I have the advantage. My roots go so deep because I've been around so long that they go a little bit into all the disciplines, to a degree, and I was there at a time when it was kind of all one, so I could make a name for myself that goes beyond my niche, or beyond trials riding.
Yeah, you're not selling trials bikes, you're selling mountain bikes.
Yeah.
With someone like yourself who has forged such a long, successful career in bikes, is there something, whether it's a kid getting into bikes or whether it's maybe a rider who's already becoming professional, is there any advice you'd essentially give them to help forge that career in mountain biking?
I don't know. It's hard to say. It sounds cliche to say have fun and all that, but it like we said, it is. And I always said, like, you can only make a first impression once. That means, be nice to people and tolerate. And then if you want to get paid and be professional, then treat it like a business. Because so many people, especially kids, they come from high school sports where some rich dad might buy the jerseys for the team and they have to do nothing in return, and then they get sponsored, and at the beginning it's all good and nice. They just stoked to get free product, and then comes the money and the travel and the fame with that. But along the way, they sometimes forget that at the end of the day, nobody gives those kids money because without expecting anything back. And different sponsors want different things. Like traditionally it was racing, so as long as you're on the podium, you have your sponsorship deal secured. The problem with racing is only one guy can be on the podium, but there can be other ways you can make sponsors happy. And one sponsor might want to sponsor you just for your image, or for your, for God knows what, like for lifestyle, for results, for testing. You might be, the biggest value might be for testing, or might be consulting, or sometimes you just hit the right demographic. You're the 17-year-old girl they would like to have in their team. So, if you check the boxes, then you be creative and sometimes find ways to make sponsors happy. Like, I'll give you one example. When I first came to the States here, I thought everything was so Hollywood and big, and GT asked me, hey, do you want to go on summer tour with the BMX team? We pay you $60 a day. I was like, what? we got shit money in Germany, but I made more than $60 a day when I did a trials show in Germany, and I wasn't professional, you know. It's like I have to go back to school. I cannot like bug around, you know. So I wouldn't really go. I mean, we would do sometimes for special occasions. I would ride with the freestyle guys, but I wouldn't be on their summer tour where they would just like go from one sleep, like literally like 5 guys would share one Motel 6 room and sleep in the van and eat fast food. But I would go to a promoter of a local bike expo. And they were like, "Hey, Hans, can you do shows?" And I said, "Well, yeah, can you pay me?" "Well, we cannot really pay you." But I said, "Well, if you set me up a course with obstacles in the middle, bring an old car in, and if you let me put up some banners of GT or whatever, I can sell this." And then I could go to GT and say, "Hey, instead of you having to pay $2,000 to be at this expo or buy a booth, if you pay me $100, I put up one of your banners." And I did that with 5 sponsors. And the next thing I know, I had $500, and it was kind of worthwhile my time, but I had to get creative. And then the promoter was stoked. He didn't have to pay me, but he had me as the attraction. The people who came to the expo were stoked because they had never seen a trials rider they wanted to see. And so it was like a win-win for everybody involved. So it's just like an example of sometimes you had to become a little bit creative. And I mean, it's in a way kind of like what you guys with the Drop and Roll do, I guess. You know, like you have different sponsors who help you keep the team and the trailer and the infrastructure together. So
I think it's partly because it's trials, especially now, isn't necessarily that closely linked to mountain biking, and there's not money in trials itself. So shows is almost always the sort of primary source of income for your typical trial rider, isn't it?
Yeah. Unless like Danny or Fabio, you know, they can do it with like, you know, the videos and endorsements. But but generally speaking,
in a general sense, it's like,
yes,
I'd say mostly
it is the trial thing. And back in the days, I mean, yes, the level of riding has gone up a lot, but the structure of a basic show is still the same. You know, you climb up, and then you jump over a person. But I used to do the shows mainly by myself, and I like a whole show with 25 minutes long.
And did you commentate as well? Or
not so often. I did it rarely, but I usually try to have a commentator. And I knew, as you know, a commentator can be half the show.
Yeah,
a good one. Sure. You know, especially if you have a bad one. And then often I had to improvise. I couldn't travel with one. I would have to like, hey, is there somebody who can announce it? And some people were good. And that's actually how I met Carmen, my wife.
Oh, really?
she always put a microphone in the hand and the NEC, and they told her, "Hey, can you announce that?"
Did she commentate on your show?
Yeah, my first one. Yeah, there's literally a photo on that wall on the other side of this wall. From that day, and that's how we met for the first time. But what I was saying is I was doing show. I brought always 2 bikes, a 20-inch and a mountain bike. Once I started doing more stuff, the trial stuff on a mountain bike, people related much more to it, and they gave me much more respect even. Before on the 20-inch bike, they always looked at it like it is still now with those hardcore trials guys with no seat. People saying, "Oh, that's a special bike. Maybe it's really easy on that bike or so." You know, they don't realize until like then somebody takes a regular full suspension mountain bike and does that same stuff, you know. And so that's how, in those old days, it was actually quite exhausting to do a 25-minute show or 30-minute show by yourself, you know.
Yeah, we've definitely got it easy with 3 or 4 riders.
Yeah, I know. I envy you guys sometimes when I watch you guys.
Well, when you end up meeting us the night before and making us drink way more than we want to, you have to make it as relaxed as possible. Like. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to do it.
Don't blame me.
Did you do a show at the Olympics then?
Yeah, we did a show at the it wasn't like a typical show by myself. It was like an extreme sports act that at the closing ceremony of the Atlanta Olympics.
Oh, 96.
And that was like when X Games had just started in 95.
Yeah.
And this guy, Kenny Ortega, who was a big choreographer for Michael Jackson, and he was the director of High School Musical film recently. So he's still around. He knew everyone in the music industry, but he choreographed this extreme sports act. And we had like the top BMXers, like Dave Mirra, Matt Hoffman, Dennis McCoy. We had like Tony Hawk, Caballero, Andy MacDonald, all the top skateboarders. We had some inline skaters in that too, and some trampoline guys. And there was 4 trials guys, myself, Libor Karas, Doug White, and one other kid. and they choreographed our show for the whole, with like an 8-minute act, and the Trials guy were kind of on the side doing this thing, but they were saying there was a couple billion.
Yeah, I was going to say, it must be insane.
There was a couple billion viewers. That's the other thing. Like, talked about the media earlier and how I had the stage to myself, and there was just so much little media. So when you got into the media, it was often really big. Like, I remember in the early days when Danny came out with his first video, and people were like, "Oh, yes, 40,000 views or 1 million views or 50 million views." I always tell the story. Literally 2 weeks before I first came to America and was invited on this really big German TV game show, where people bet stuff, and I was one of the guys who would do a bet on my bike. But it was such a popular show that not only all of Germany, but even the neighboring countries would all watch that.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was only 3 TV stations in Germany. So on a Saturday night, when this show would be on, there would be half of Germany watching literally that show. Yeah. And we had like 40 million people live, 41 million people live in one go. Not over like 4 months, So sometimes I use this number because like as impressive as it is and was with Danny's videos, but in some ways we did stuff back in those days where, and apparently they say the Olympic closing ceremony was watched by over 1 billion people, if not 2, which I have no idea, but I was just a small part in it, but it was really special to be part of that and a good memory.
Yeah, it's funny now how just everything there's just analytics for everything. And back then, I guess you just don't fully know how many people have watched you over the years. And I suppose that's what brands sometimes want to see, don't they? They need the...
That's the one number I would actually... I might give my left finger for it if I would know that number of how many impressions some of these... Because it was impossible to... It's like with these photos there in Ireland on the cliffs of Moher there, the one over there. Those photos circulated everywhere on the internet. There was a few of them. And as you know, whenever we do something crazy, it never looks as hard on film or photo than it is in reality.
Yeah.
But these photos, for some reason, had this kind of effect where you get the goosebumps. Yeah. And there was a few other ones than the one there where I have the orange jacket on.
Is that photo in Ireland? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no way.
And those were those cliffs, and since then they broke off. But we even jumped the gap there, and it's a 600-foot drop. And
really?
But those photos were like, those emails like your grandmother sends you because the mountain bikers in, and they would come in every language, from Japanese to Chinese to French and German. And sometimes I wish I could know how many people seen that stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like going viral before viral was a thing. Like email viral was almost the precursor to like YouTube viral, wasn't it?
Yeah.
People share those like clips, but because it's
did you see that?
Just like it's just a ripped version of it, so you'll never like fully know.
Yeah, because there was no platforms like social media platforms.
You were saying earlier about how many different ways there is to make a living in mountain biking as opposed to before you started doing it, which is racing. Do you think there's almost like a bit of a issue with the way that mountain biking, their budgets are almost sort of assigned to different disciplines, whether it's like these influencers, YouTubers that are coming out, or racers, or Instagram people? I guess it's kind of like $1 million question, but...
Well, we have too many subcultures, and it makes it really hard for marketing people to decide who they invest in and who not. And then, like, sometimes you wonder, well, even though he gets all these views, does it sell a hat for us or a bike? Or, like, it's hard to... But we all know it's not so black and white. Just because, like, you ride a bike in the show, very rarely somebody buys right then and there or tomorrow the bike. But they might buy one in a year later. Mm-hmm. And maybe you're not the only reason. Maybe it's also the price. The bike was available. It had the right color and the right price. And the person liked it because Duncan had one, and he always wanted one, like when he saw it first. So sometimes you're just a small part, and that's hard for sometimes sponsors like to see, oh, he posts something and we got an order of like 500 pedals, today, and that's great when you can do that. But that's in general, we just like contribute.
Yeah, just little bits
to it. And then you have the whole, I call it social doping, where all of a sudden, there's more and more people want to eat from the cake and they want to do stuff, but then they make up numbers or buy followers or likes, and that's a whole other thing. And some sponsors go along with it and turn a blind eye because it makes them indirectly look good, or they look good in front of their bosses.
Yeah.
And in other cases, the sponsors, they're getting more and more real now, and they kind of can see through that some people with like an incredible high amount of number of followers is a bit unrealistic when there's like 10 guys that have really big names have like clearly a lot less, and I think that should make everybody wonder if they're really getting ripped off. And the reason I call it social doping is because these people steal from other people who want to make a living, just like the dopers did when somebody shot up EPO, and then he beats me and takes the prize money from me and takes the sponsorship for next year. And it's a little bit,
it
can be with
I never heard that term. It's good.
And but there was also cheating back in the days before social media. Sometimes the publishers of magazines would tell an advertiser, "Oh, we sell like 100,000 issues, and our magazine gets read on average by 4 people, so we reach like 400,000 people." And sometimes those things could not be exactly proven either. In some countries, it's a bit more controlled than others, or with bigger magazines like the New York Times, it's kind of a bit more controlled. But with mountain bike magazines, there was like, take the guy's word.
There's no way of fully run. I suppose the internet in some ways has made it harder to do that, in that you can usually see the stats, but like you say, there's this, I think it's a good term you use, social doping, where you can pretty much like buy followers. And I've been quite surprised before where you hear brands and they say they'll see someone with say like 50,000 followers on Instagram, but they'll maybe get like 100 likes or not even.
Yeah, but then they also buy likes and they buy comments. But then the one thing, there's analytics who tell you all that. And sometimes, I know I have a few fake accounts that follow me, but none of my sponsors ever paid for them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they find you because there's literally these click farms.
Yeah.
And they want to make their fake accounts look authentic, so they follow certain interesting people.
Yeah.
So I have a small percentage of people on there too, but some of these obvious ones, you just go and look at who liked their stuff, and then you see all these accounts with weird names from Pakistan or India, or people who have never posted any photos, or but
they follow like 5,000 people and have like 1 follower.
But we're in for the long run, so we'll survive those guys too.
How many sponsors do you have?
Not enough. Right now I have about I don't know, like 10 who pay me salaries.
Yeah.
But that varies. The deals can be very different. It can be sometimes deals are very small, and other bigs can be, it depends on many factors. But there was times I had more, but not necessarily because, sometimes companies merge and all of a sudden they do wheels and tires, or, and then you have like just one sponsor. Or, with my 510 Adidas deal, it's shoes and clothes and glasses, and there's a lot of stuff in one bundle, you know. So
the one thing we were talking about with GT, so you've been with them for how long? 35 years?
Yeah, next year it's going to be 35, and Adidas is pretty long too.
I was going to say Adidas, because this is another story that we should probably talk about, was that I actually met you back in, I don't even know when it would be, but I think you were there with Adidas. I remember you wearing Adidas stuff, but you were in Scotland.
Yeah, for the Helter Skelter. And that was probably 2001 or 2.
Okay, cool.
And they had this Helter Skelter event up in by Loch Ness there.
Yeah.
A Red Bull event. It was a downhill race, and I was invited, and Adidas Eyewear sponsored it.
Oh, really?
And they brought me up there, I want to say. But I was already sponsored by Adidas. I had 2 contracts then, one with Eyewear and one with Adidas. That was before they owned 510.
Yeah.
But and I came up then. I think I remember meeting you because I remember somebody said, "Hey, there's these Trials kids, and you guys were practicing in some creek, right?"
Yeah.
Or so, and there was 3 or 4 or 5 of you, and
I think there was 2 of us there, and I think me, my dad, and my friend, and his dad was there.
Right. Okay.
And I think Tracy Mosley was there.
Was he? Eh?
Yeah, and then there was 2 Trials riders, Ian Cooper and Thibaut Mario. The French guy, but they were doing a show, but I don't think they did it because the weather was so bad. But
and I was doing a photo shoot that afternoon. I think that's why I came down to see you guys, because we were on the way to Urquhart Castle, I think it was called, and did a photo shoot there.
Yeah, I think that was like one of the first times I'd ever kind of experienced, like, because you were there with all your sponsors, you had like, I think because you must have been there with Adidas, you had all these like reps with you. They were almost a bit of a kind of rock star thing going on. Me and my friends, we'd just started Trials, and that was definitely, I think at that point we'd seen Tricks and Stunts with Martin Ashton and Martin Hawes.
Yeah.
And we had that on VHS, and you had a bit of a, well, more than a cameo, you actually had a section in that.
Yeah, I had quite a big part in it. I mean, it was the Martins video, and they came here to do the intro, and I was supposed to be the evil Dr. No Way. We filmed it right out here, and I had this bunny rabbit, just like this guy here, Kobe, and I had him like just like this. This is Kobe.
Oh, we need to get a reenactment of it.
This is Kobe, and this was the bunny rabbit, like Dr. Evil had a cat, in the James Bond film, and this is my evil. And I want these English bunny rabbits eliminated. And I mean eliminated. And that was my line in the film. And then they started filming the how-to part, and the filmmakers realized that the Martins were pretty crap in actually explaining how to do this shit. They could do it all, but they couldn't really explain it. So I ended up having a really big part in doing the explaining in the film and being in it. And don't breathe too hard. The mic is right there. I think I contributed in a way. Not only I was one of the first privateers to go away from teams and have sponsors as a private guy, but also break away from racing and pursue a career. And when I first started my adventure team, which was probably in '98 or so, and I had already started doing a few adventures before, but I told my team manager, hey, I don't want to leave GT. I said, I want to leave Team GT, and I want to start my adventure team. You guys have enough racers. We had like 10 of the biggest names on the racing team. And I said, I can actually get you exposure far beyond the racing exposure and hopefully some mainstream. And that's when and at the beginning they didn't know what I wanted to do, or they didn't get it, and they didn't see a value in it until then my trips, we started making documentary films, and these adventure trips, like, that's not an example, but going to Machu Picchu or to China would show up in like 30 different magazines, would run a story on it, and it would end up on TV, and we use it for video segments and ad campaigns and all this. And so we would do all that, and it would all of a sudden lead to something. But like you say, with Adidas, they have been a sponsor also since '93. So I think I'm like 28 years now with them.
You must be one of their longest, if not their longest serving athlete.
And pretty much in terms of active athletes, they have some guys
ambassadors and stuff,
like old soccer players who are going to be always but they haven't put a pair of soccer shoes on in 10 years,
Yeah.
But no, it's been cool that way, but you can also learn to become professional. And sometimes I also, there's a fine line between selling out and trying to be too cool for school, or not having sponsors. And in the ideal world, you don't have to worry about sponsors, but I always felt like I need to give them something back. And that's why you see a patch on my uniform, or you see a hat on, in an interview, or a sticker on my car when I drive somewhere, or rent a car. And then some people would, oh God, the guy with his patches. But the guys who say that, they are usually the guys who still sleep on their parents' couch when they're 35, and they never gotten anywhere. And even the BMXers and the skateboarders who were really anti-commercial stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
Eventually they found ways to bring in sponsors, like Red Bull did with the helmets.
Yeah.
Or the BMX and skaters were often not corporate, but then T-Mobile started sponsoring them, and their color is pink. So these guys would just put a pink paintbrush and put that over their uniform or helmet, and that would be the T-Mobile association, Yeah. But they would start having to do that if they really wanted those sponsor deals. And I remember Red Bull here in America, they came to me when they first came to America, and they wanted to sponsor me. And I was like, sorry, Swatch has been my helmet sponsor for years. I'm not going to ditch them. And, they were like, hey, we have $5,000 we can give you. Can you wear our helmet? We're going to do this helmet thing. And I was like, you know what? I can't. But, there's a new sport in America. It's called free riding. And I bet you those kids would do it in a heartbeat for $5,000. Yeah. And the guy turned to those free riders, and I remember some of those guys like Aaron Chase, and before you knew it, they were Red Bull athletes, and some of them are still to this day.
That's pretty interesting, isn't it?
And I missed the Red Bull boat.
Well, you've done your own thing. You shouldn't have too many regrets.
No, I don't. There's always two sides, and sometimes I wish I had Red Bull. Because they're so good in supporting projects, and I could just see the whole adventure thing could have been taken to a whole new level, and also with their distribution side of things. Sometimes I wish I had I was often kind of a lone warrior, one-man team, but yeah, you win some and you lose some, and
yeah, I guess it's good to do your own thing. So then, did Swatch kind of pull out of the bike riding thing, or do you still work with Swatch? No,
that lasted about 19 years, so it was a good run. And especially if you think about these companies, they every like 3 years they change upper management, and then these guys come in with whole new marketing plans and and I've survived about 5 or 6 of them, and eventually a guy came in who was like, you know what, we're gonna get out of action sports and we're gonna do all art and music, and that lasted about half a year. And they came back to action sports, but then I wasn't part of that rebuilding of the team anymore. So
well, still 20 years is pretty good going.
Yeah, I would say so.
For a sponsorship.
Yeah.
So you've obviously been at it a long time. Do you think, is there any plans to stop riding anytime soon, or are you just going to keep carrying on and see where it takes you?
Yeah, actually, I always had that curiosity of, let's see where it takes me, because it's been always amazing and stuff happened because I was open to it. And sometimes it's a bit of a risk. Like I said earlier, it wasn't easy to become a professional rider because nobody else had done it before. And sometimes you can say, yeah, I was at the right time at the right place. But personally, I feel like everybody in life gets opportunities dealt. Not everybody jumps on them because it takes sometimes courage or the right timing or intuition or whatever to do decisions at the right time. And like we just briefly talked about this, I could also list some regrets or stuff I done wrong or could have done better. But overall, I don't want to complain, and you win some and you lose some. But I'm always was wondering. I remember when I first started riding internationally in '82, there was some rumors that maybe in the '92 Olympics there could be trials.
Yeah.
And I was like, I missed that boat. There's no way I'm going to be riding in 10 years.
Yeah.
Would have been so cool to be around. And then trials didn't end up making it in the Olympics, but I was still riding then 10 years later. And so you never know what's next. And it's kind of exciting to be part of it. And then also in some cases, yeah, like even with the whole e-bike thing, I find it really exciting. I'm still riding my regular bikes just as much, but I actually believe it's not a black and white thing. It's, you can do both. You don't have to decide between one or the other. But there's all new challenges and stuff that I could never do before, especially technical uphills and stuff. And
especially when you have the trial skills to tap into.
Exactly that. And then and some of these trips in the past I've done, they were pretty epic in terms of exhausting, and you had to be really fit to do certain things in the Himalayas or in Africa. And sometimes I wonder, man, if I could sort out the battery thing, it would be cool to go back to some of those things and do them. It would be obviously easier.
You can just run the whole adventure career again. Just go back to you've got all the itineraries. Just go back on the e-bike.
I know.
Just don't even try and change it at all. Just be like, or just do it backwards on the e-bike.
Yeah.
One thing I should have asked you earlier was you've got the foundation as well. How did that all come about, and what was the sort of inspiration for that?
Yeah, it's called Wheels for Life, and we are sitting right here in the headquarters of Wheels for Life. It's actually a non-profit. My wife and I do it. We do it all voluntarily, and we give bikes to people in need of transportation in developing countries. So most of the bikes we given away are in African countries, but we have also done projects in South America, in Asia, and different places where people are often so poor they have no transportation. They cannot even afford public transportation if there's any. Kids walk to school forever, and healthcare workers use the bikes to visit patients in remote villages, or farmers pack their bikes up with mangoes and bring them to the market or whatever. And so we we started that 15 years ago, and to date we've given away about 15,000 bikes in
Oh, really?
in about 33 different countries, I want to say.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So is that something that, are most of your personal sponsors supporters of the foundation as well, or is it a little bit of both?
They all have over the years, and some of them more than others, but it's not a requirement. I mean, I have done contracts where I say, hey, I'll take less, but why don't you give some money to Wheels for Life? But I'm not taking any money out of Wheels for Life. You know, for me, it's like I always said, as long as I get paid and make a living, I can afford to give something back to the sport and do it in form of this. But it even to the point with the sponsors, a lot of my sponsors do see the value in it, and I understand that they cannot necessarily do every single year or so. I mean, some do, but it comes and goes, and charities sometimes are more in favor than others, or a new one comes along and then the older ones get kind of neglected, and sometimes I have to also be careful. I don't want to ask my sponsors too much, because like I'm already asking them to sponsor me. And then I ask them, maybe, can you also help support a film project I'm doing? And then I'm asking on top of that, and can you also throw some money at my charity? So sometimes you have to be also careful not to overstretch, things. But it's obviously a good thing, and it's a tax write-off. And most of my sponsors see the value in it and see that it's the real deal. So many charities do stuff where they pay big salaries and they pay, only like a fraction of the money goes to the cause.
Yeah, just so bureaucratic.
If you give me $1, I can pretty much guarantee you that at least 97 cents goes straight to buying somebody a bike, and the other 3% could be bank fees, or we do hire an accountant who does the books, but it's like no overhead.
Yeah, it must be pretty cool. So do you actually go out and give the people the bikes? And then I think I saw something.
I sometimes go.
Did you and Danny go back and see some of the people that have been?
Yeah,
using
we
them
tied it in with projects before, and Danny was along on the one in Africa we did, and I cannot always go there in person. We have project leaders in those countries, and we vet them and screen them really well, and they have to go through a process, and then we start out, and we have ways to controlling them and read between the lines and make sure the bikes end up in the right hands, and every once in a while we go, and I'm actually due for an Africa trip. I haven't been like in 5 years, I want to say. Yeah, okay. So I need to go back and visit a few projects. It's always great to see it firsthand, because you wouldn't believe mobility is such a key, and it really changes lives. And a kid can all of a sudden get an education because he can get to school, because the school might be 5 or 10 miles away, and there's no way the kid would always walk or be in time. And then he can go secondary school, and then the next thing is he's going to university and becoming a doctor or something, or becoming a leader in its village because he has the education, and it helps to elevate the whole lifestyle, or their daily lives at least. It's
kind of similar to what you said when you said like someone just watching one of your videos that can completely change their life, from getting a bike to having a bike shop to having a career, and what you say about getting a bike as well. It's like, in all aspects of life, that little extra foot up or change or something that could happen in one day and out of the blue can completely transform your life. It's pretty mad how it happens.
It's nice that there is that magic.
It's good. Well, on that note, I think we can call it a day. Thank you very much for coming on or having us. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the beer.
Anytime. We have a few more.
Thanks. Definitely particularly enjoyed the Tricks and Stunts remake. As did Dave.
No, and I have to say I appreciate where you and your generation of riders have taken the whole sport and the scene, and how you become creative in your own ways, like doing stuff from podcasts to shows to content, and it's cool. It's a cool thing to be a professional athlete, and I think kids should look up to it. They just need to make it realistic, and like you can learn a lot from watching people. And you can only watch what they do. Like people can study your career or Jeff Lenowski's or Danny's or or John Tomax or whatever, but they can also learn from mistakes from guy. Remember, that guy used to be really hot, and why did he disappear all of a sudden? And why is he again? And you can learn from stuff people do wrong. So, yeah, go out and live your dreams, kids.
Yeah, for sure. Nice one. Well, just before you go, where on the off chance that people listening do not already follow you on the internet and other places, where's the best place to keep up to date with you?
I only do print media, nothing else.
Okay, so you need to buy the August edition of Freeride magazine in Germany.
No, you go to... I'm on all the platforms, pretty much. I mean, I have a YouTube channel, which is cool, and I have a lot of new and old stuff on there. I have Instagram and Facebook. I do a little bit on Twitter, not much, but I have it. I have a website that has a lot of information on there about my bikes, and it has interviews and media examples. And if people wonder why I'm still sponsored at my age, if they see my media book and I have it actually on my website,
cool.
That's something, or my bike setup, or links to other useful links, how-tos. So those are the best places to
just search Hans Ray. And now, after a little bit of tech support, you can answer your Facebook messages as well.
I know I had an issue with my Facebook page, and then you, Duncan, were the savior, and I could answer a bunch of. I couldn't see the questions people asked; they would disappear. But then I opened up in a different browser, and
so no excuse. So hit him up on Facebook, and you'll almost definitely get a reply as long as it's a good question.
Exactly.
Nice one. Cheers, Hans.
All right,
thanks
cheers
again.